Okay. Is that working? It's not, is it? Oh, that's a good start. Hello. Oh, that's working. Fantastic. Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's meeting, which is a launch meeting for Derbyshire Needs a Pay Rise. My name's James Eaden. I'm the president of the TUC, and I'm going to be chairing tonight's meeting. In a minute, I'm going to introduce our panel of speakers and just say a bit about what's going to happen in the meeting. Well, I'm very, very pleased to welcome everyone here tonight to this meeting. We decided to call this meeting and launch Derbyshire Needs a Pay Rise well before the election was called, well before Theresa May went on her walking holiday in Wales and decided to call a snap election. We'd decided that we wanted to try and focus as a local trade union movement on the issue of low pay and unorganised groups of workers in particular to try and really build up those issues. But the fact that the election has been called and the fact that we see in the Labour manifesto a very, very clear commitment on a whole number of key issues, including the idea of £10 an hour, an end to zero-hour contracts, and a commitment to a whole raft of important issues of workers' rights, I think makes it very timely that we're holding this meeting in the middle of this election campaign, where those issues, along with a raft of other issues, are central to the campaign. And clearly, I think that will be a theme in some of our discussions here tonight. So if I can just introduce our panel of speakers, I'll start over on my left here. This is Gareth Lane, who's a community organiser for the Bakers Union, and he's going to be one of our speakers tonight. To my left here is Rebecca Long-Bailey, who is the Labour candidate for Salford and Eccles. On the leaflet it says Labour MP, but obviously MPs are no longer MPs at the moment, they're candidates, but soon to be again the Labour MP for Eccles and Salford, and Labour's shadow business spokesman, was Labour shadow business secretary before the election was called. And we're very, very pleased to have Rebecca here today. So I'm sure some of you may have been watching the media today, saw a storming performance on Sky News today from Rebecca giving the Tories what for, and that's absolutely fantastic. And on my right here, certainly not politically, but on my right here is Cheryl Pidgeon. And Cheryl, I think, is very well known to trade unions and activists here in Derbyshire. Cheryl is an officer for Unite the Union and plays the leading role in Unite the Union's campaigning around Sports Direct in Shirebrook. And Sports Direct in Shirebrook really is, in many ways, the sort of the epitome of the whole issue of low pay and no rights at work today. So I'm really, really pleased to introduce our panel. I'm going to ask the speakers to speak from the podium here, because we are being filmed for tonight's meeting. And it's a great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, which is Gareth Lane from the Bakers Union. Gareth.
Okay, is this working? Yeah. Okay, excellent. My name's Gareth Lane, and I'm a community organiser with the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union. And I'm very proud to work for a union that has organised, protested and beat the second biggest employer on the earth over the issue of zero-hour contracts. Every McDonalds worker will now be offered a fixed-hour contract as a direct result of the work my union and the workers involved has done. My job is to find workplace leaders at McDonalds and at KFC, then agitate those workers into taking action that delivers victories in the workplace and fosters a real sense of community and builds real power within that workplace. If you didn't know already, our union has recognition with Greggs. So now you have an excuse for a Greggs sausage roll. You can say it's an act of solidarity with the Bakers Union. So I wanted to start by talking about who a fast food worker is, because there's a lot of misconceptions about who fast food workers are. McDonald's would have us believe that they are doing the community a favour by employing those unable to get jobs elsewhere. McDonald's would say that its jobs are entry-level jobs into the job market, and that it is training our young people for a future career, for the good of the community, and bringing skills to young workers and giving jobs to people no one else will employ. I mean, that is just absolute bullshit. So I'll tell you about some of our members in McDonald's and the situations that they're in. We've got a young woman called Lauren. She's a 26-year-old engineering graduate who saw McDonald's as a route through university after doing the right thing, studying hard, working hard, and fighting her way through university. She finds herself up to the eyeballs in debt. Her degree is no good to her, and there is no work for her. She's stuck in McDonald's and can't find a way out. Then we've got Tom. He's a single parent of one. McDonald's keeps him and his son apart. Some weeks Tom can't afford to pay the £35 train fare to go and see his son in London, or he has to make the choice between starving himself, basically, or providing for his 3-year-old boy. And then we have Amy. She's a 25-year-old single mum, getting shifts, 1 week, no shifts the next, so poverty-stricken, that her only option is to live with an abusive man who beats her and is a danger to her child. There's also the story, the migrant workers' stories, which are horrendous. There's a 30-year-old Syrian worker, Sri Lankan worker who we've just recruited, who's a migrant who fled war in his country to start a better life in the UK. He finds himself working almost 60 hours a week for the biggest corporation on earth, yet he lives in a shed at the bottom of the garden in South London with his young family. He lives in a shed at the bottom of his garden. Then there's Sam. She's a 20-year-old forced to live with her parents. She shares the burden of childcare with her parents while she works, earning a poverty wage of £5.55 an hour, unable to afford childcare. McDonald's are not just exploiting her and her labour, but they are exploiting her parents as well. There's some horrendous stories around workers in the fast food industry. A Pizza Express that we organise, 3 suicides due to depression in the last 2 years. A KFC where workers are expected to work an hour for free at the end of a shift, if targets are not met. And the Subway who exploit our young people. This is common with Subway all across the country. Unemployed workers are working in Subway for free on 12-week apprenticeships with only the sort of Subway are dangling a carrot in front of them saying that if you work these 12 weeks, there's a job at the end of it, and there almost hardly ever is. Bullying and sexual harassment, this is a daily reality for a fast food worker. If you speak out, gone are your hours are cut, you're shoved out the door by a manager who has the power to decide if you eat or not this week. 0-hour contracts are used to punish workers. The threat of hunger and homelessness are used to make workers toe the line. This is frighteningly common, and what is really, really scary is how young women workers are treated in some of these fast food workers. Older male managers use their power to identify and abuse their victims in these workplaces. But we have to be very honest with ourselves. Our movement has let these people down persistently. Our movement's answers to the changing economy, the casualisation of work, the structural changes in the workplace have been inadequate. We need to change our approach to organisation. Flashy publicity campaigns to apply pressure on employers will only get us so far. Social media, Twitter, Instagram is all very good, but it will only get us so far. Word of mouth, face-to-face organisation is the key to our success. The old traditions of you go to work, you join a union are dead. The majority of people I meet don't know what a trade union is, don't know what a union can do, and have no contact whatsoever with any trade unions. We have to change the way we approach organisation. We cannot organise in the traditional way in the fast food industry. There is no gate that we can stand on to talk to workers as they come out. We cannot aim all our efforts at one workplace and try to recruit 50% to win recognition. We have to think differently. That's why 3 years ago we called for a £10 an hour minimum wage for all workers, regardless of age. And the banning of 0-hour contract pushed trade union rights for all workers. Now, the Bakers Food and Allied Union, Workers Union, was ridiculed by the leadership of some bigger unions. But there was two people who did not ridicule us at all, but supported us and stood side by side with us. And that was John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn, who met with us, listened to our members, and now our union's policies are in the Labour Party manifesto going into the election. Although, when the Labour Party wins, it may be time for us to increase our demands. After all, Ronald McDonald can afford to pay much more. John and Jeremy have supported our fast food rights campaign, a campaign that has delivered victories for workers in McDonald's and in Witherspoons around the issue of 0-hour contracts, with McDonald's announcing concessions the day after our last International Day of Action. We have learned a tremendous amount about organising from fellow fast food workers and fellow unions around the world, in New Zealand and the United States. That is that one-to-one conversation with workers brings workers to the fight to improve terms and conditions. We have made small but important victories in workplace after workplace. We win meal allowances. We win new equipment for disabled workers. We change rota systems so that workers have more notice of hours, putting an end to bullying managers and trials by social media, forcing pubs we organise in to take zero tolerance to racism from customers. Workers are changing their lives themselves with a collective response at work. We are building respect for the union from the bottom up among workers. We give workers the tools and they win themselves. They understand the power of collective organisation in that way. Our fast food workers are not just members who dutifully pay their subs, waiting for the day they need an expert official to come and represent their interests. Our members are worker organisers who represent their own interests day in, day out, and fight for themselves, their families and each other. We expect our members to build a union, win victories, and foster an atmosphere of unity and collectivity. We are building workers' committees, workers' democracy, changing the structures of the union with fast food workers leading those changes, explaining what is needed to organise across the industry to the trade union. At Baker's conference, fast food workers are now the start of the conference every year. Our workers' organisers are changing their own workplaces. I spoke earlier about a Pizza Express where workers had suffered suicide. Never again. There's a union there now, organised. I spoke about workplaces where workers were expected to work for free at the end of their shift. That won't happen again. There's a union there organised. All this is good, but we need to do much better. We're a small union and we need some support. But what we also recognise is that our most powerful weapon is strike action. When workers use their right to take strike action, they understand they have power. They understand that they don't have to live in silence. They can win. They can change things. So keep your eyes peeled, because when a strike breaks out in the fast food industry, the bakers will ask its allies to visit fast food workers in their locality to agitate those workers into the union. At this point, I would have loved to have talked about how we organise fast food workers, the process of how we find workers leaders, develop those workers into union organisers, start to deliver victories and build collective action within a workplace. But if McDonald's understands how we organise, we give them an advantage. And the head of security at McDonald's is the former second in command of the CIA. But don't worry, we've got Ian Hodson, our national president, keeping a firm eye on him. But when dealing with multinational companies, we cannot afford to only hit them locally. Capital is able to move countries at free will. Global corporations operate cross-border, cross-continent, on a world scale. The union movement's response to globalisation should be internationalist. Our response needs to be on an international scale, as well as on a local and a personal scale. When we have international days of action, our global days of action have been an incredible success. In terms of international solidarity, a global fast food workers' day of action looks something like this. It will kick off in New Zealand and Australia. It will spread to the Philippines, Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore. There are actions in Morocco, Greece, parts of Eastern Europe, Germany, France, Denmark, then to Bermuda and the Caribbean islands. Then it explodes in the USA with strikes with the Fight for 15 before finishing with huge demonstrations of working class confidence and power in Sao Paulo, Rio and Buenos Aires. The next international day of action that we're launching will be on the 4th of September this year. And I think we have an awful lot to learn from our comrades in the Fight for 15 in the United States. People who I have been privileged to have spent time with over the last year. I have learned a great deal about their organising tactics, their attitude towards workers, and they are winning. They have shifted $64 billion from the yachts and mansions of the rich and the elite into the pockets of low-paid workers. 22 million Americans have seen a pay rise as a result of the Fight for 15 campaign. Babies are warm, children are fed, lives are improved as a result of workers taking action themselves. There are a few things that are systematic in the Fight for 15 and are key lessons for us as we rebuild our trade union movement in this country. And that is these. Respect workers. The most important part of organising workers is to listen to workers. Workers are angry. Each worker has a story of injustice they often want to talk about. They want confirmation that the way they are treated is wrong. When I'm talking to a worker, I will attempt to ensure that I listen to that worker, and that worker talks about 70% of the time, and I only talk about 30% of the time. If a worker's not talking, I will ask leading questions that induces anger out of that worker. And my response to that anger is always union, organise, respect the job that workers do. Workers in the fast food industry are often thought of as lower class workers. This is despite the tremendous amount of skills that go into, say, working in McDonalds. Customer service itself is an art form. Never mind having to deal with egotistical management and rigid structures that make the job harder than it needs to be. And we have to be persistent and consistent with workers. I will contact my workplace organisers as often as possible to find what they are doing, what problems they have, and how we can overcome those problems together. Also sharing best practice amongst workers and sharing the skills that we are picking up along the way in terms of organising. But I want to say a few things about the election, not much, but a few things. Whatever happens on June the 8th, the struggle needs to carry on. Now we have the greatest opportunity of our lives. We have to fight like lions for a Corbyn government. A Corbyn government. We have the opportunity to lift millions out of poverty. We have the opportunity to secure a future for our children. We have the opportunity to put right the injustices of the past. But that's all we have at the moment, an opportunity. And we have to grasp that opportunity. When I wake up on June the 9th, I want to say now is our turn. I'm sure many in this room can remember Thatcher marching her stormtroopers through our communities, and some probably still have the scars to prove it. Smashing up our picket lines, tearing our villages apart, destroying our way of life. This election could start to reverse all of the damage done to our communities over the last 30 odd years. For every wasted life on the dole, for every life lost to drug and alcohol, for every one of our people denied their rights for the cause of profit, it's now our turn. But make no mistake, when we've put in the work, had the arguments, won the support, and we wake up to a Labour government led by Corbyn, the fight will only intensify. The job will not be over. Being in government gives you some power, but the real power always lies in the hands of those who own the land, those who control the finance, those who sit on the boardrooms of billion-pound corporations, and those who went to the same schools and drink in the same private clubs. Our history teaches us that business and vested interests as friends in every dark corner, in the banks, in the courts, in the police, the army and the secret service. The very system is built to protect their wealth. They will do anything to hang on to their wealth and privilege. We need to remember that we lost the miners' strike because their side was more organised than our side. We didn't stick together enough to defeat the power of this land. That needs to be a lesson for us. We need to be organised on a massive scale. Where we have power, we need to be prepared to use it. And where we don't have power, we need to build it. Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell offer sweeping change. But once they are in government, we will have to fight to defend them. And I want to say this to Rebecca. When you're in government and you hit every brick wall with this manifesto, when it appears that all your roads are blocked to delivering the promises you have made, when the civil service, the courts, the establishment put too many barriers in your way, you turn to us. You turn to the trade union movement. The establishment fear nothing more than organised workers because they know they cannot stop us. They know that it's the real wealth creators that hold the power in society, and we shouldn't be afraid to use that power. I just want to say one more thing before I sit down, and that's this. To win, we first have to believe that we can win. We first have to envisage what winning looks like. Then we have to take every single small step that we can to get there. Every leaflet, every conversation, every poster, every rally organised with every action we take over the next 3 weeks, we need to consider, does this bring a Corbyn-led Labour government closer? And I salute the socialists in the Labour Party who have brought us this far. But now it's time for us to do our work. Let's have faith in our communities. Let's have faith in our class. And let's have faith that we can deliver a Corbyn-led government.
Well, thank you very much, Gareth, for that stirring and fantastic opening to our meeting today, laying down, I think, some of the key issues that face us, both organising and in terms of the election campaign ahead. Now, it's a great pleasure to introduce, once again, Cheryl. For people who live in Derbyshire and know the movement here in Derbyshire, will know that Cheryl is one of the key organisers, organising one of the iconic struggles that we face in our community, the struggle at Sports Direct. So I'd like to give a big welcome to Cheryl Pidgeon. Cheryl.
Thank you. Good evening, and thanks for the welcome. That's really great, and thanks for the work that we did alongside Toby. He took us out on the streets, so probably I ought to add that we were door knocking for his supporters, which there were many, I'm extremely pleased to say. It's a privilege to be representing Unite, the Fighting Back Union, here tonight. And thanks to Callum and everybody who's made tonight happen. They've worked so passionately. I work for Unite the Union, and I coordinate the English classes that we provide freely to the workers who at Sports Direct, whose first language is not English, because as you all know, if you can't speak the language, it's very difficult to integrate into the workplace and into the community. But I don't do that on my own. I have brilliant people in the audience and community activists and Unite activists and other union members who help and support, and just people who come along and want to defeat Mike Ashley and his cronies. There's a lot to do. But we all fight, and we continue to fight for real change for those workers who were almost being treated as slaves. And I'm not exaggerating, they were. They're commodities, or they were bodies to be slapped to jobs, all in the name of profit, rather than being respected and treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve. Many of the workers at Sports Direct are highly qualified teachers, engineers, nurses, care support staff, not the lazy benefit scroungers who live in 7-bedroomed houses, taking our jobs, etc., like the Daily Fail and the other right-wing rags would have you believe. The workers who come to our many classes have trusted us, and that's a big, big issue. They've trusted us with their time and their worries, and they're absolutely amazing human beings who I am so very proud to call our friends and now our comrades. I'm proud to say that our membership has trebled at Sports Direct. We've won over £1 million in compensation for the workers there, and many more workplace changes through our continued campaigning. Winning the Midlands TUC Campaign of the Year award has also been a highlight of our year, but the credit mustn't go to us, it must go to those brave workers who've worked with us and provided vital evidence of the sheer brutality of what was happening in Sports Direct in the face of the danger of losing their jobs. They're the real heroes and heroines of our story. And we've achieved so much together, but we still have so much more to do. I'm delighted to report that last week a new Unite branch was formed, the brand new Unite in Sports Direct branch, where migrant workers took responsibility of and took up key branch officer posts, many different nationalities, and committed to working together to continue the fight for real change at Sports Direct. I think that's bloody great. We live on this earth for a very short time in reality, 80 years if we're lucky, so for some a lot less. So why on earth do we allow governments, employers and agencies in the 21st century to treat people like slaves? Is it right in this century that if you're sick, you can't take time out of work without being told, well, you can be sick, but don't bother coming back to work? Is it right that people are so frightened to go to the toilet for fear of being punished that they urinate in drinks bottles that end up on the shelves in Sports Direct? Is it right that when your child is sick at school and the school try and contact you at your workplace, that your agency forgets to tell you or says, yeah, you can go home and sort your kids out, but don't bother to come back to work ever? Is it right that children are often left at home alone because their parents are too scared to lose their jobs and then possibly their homes? Is it right that young women are reduced to having babies on the toilet floors at work for fear of losing their jobs, or men having heart attacks at work for the very same reason? And is it right that young women are referred to as disgustingly as fresh meat by agency managers and company supervisors who offer the women the promise of permanent contracts or lighter duties in exchange for favours of certain kinds? And is it right that when you arrive at work that you're screamed at to chase ever-increasing targets while walking 25 to 30 kilometres a day, often being given instructions in a language you don't understand and then punished for not following those instructions? Not following those instructions. And is it right that rip-off agencies slap bodies to jobs and take huge profits from employers, all of whom refuse to take proper responsibility for the welfare and health and safety of their workers, whilst paying them marginally above the minimum wage? Then when the minimum wage does rise, agencies suddenly change their working hours of such violated workers and reduce their annual income by £2,500. No, of course it's not right. It's obscene that anyone, anywhere, should be treated in such a manner in our country. But this happened at Sports Direct, and some of it is still happening. Unite are determined to fight on, along with our comrades in other unions. Our goals are to transfer all workers to permanent contracts so that they can have a regular income, build a stable life, and provide for their children, just like we try. We need an end to 0 hours contracts and rip-off agencies who put profit before people. Well, they should be outlawed too. The only people who are profiting from the precarious working arrangements at Sports Direct are the agencies and the shareholders. And of course, that includes Mike Ashley, who obscenely rolls out wads of £50 notes in front of the cameras while his workers are working for a pittance. When people are living on low pay, they often don't live, they exist. I know this from personal experience. It hurts, it demeans, it makes you physically and mentally ill. It makes you often struggle to pay bills, getting into debt and falling victim to rip-off credit providers. Depending on in-work benefits to survive is shocking in this day and age when companies are making huge profits. What is that all about? Why should the taxpayer who has to pay his or her tax on a regular basis be made to pick up the bill for greedy fat cats and rip-off agencies? It's morally wrong and unacceptable. The case for the £10 minimum wage is undeniable at Sports Direct. I challenge Mike Ashley, who at last year's AGM wanted to be a model employer for all other employers to follow. OK then, Mike, transfer the workers at Sports Direct onto permanent contracts. Pay the £10 an hour to the workers. Even a rough calculation uncovers that if every worker at Sports Direct was paid £10 an hour, there'd still be ample profits for the shareholders and the likes of Ashley. But it's not just about pay when you go to work. It's about respect and feeling valued, being treated with dignity, and the right to justice when you're wronged. It's not about 6 strikes and you're sacked with no recourse to justice. It's not about working in an environment where the fire doors are locked with cable ties, where regular fire drills are not carried out, and when you're spoken to like you've come off the bottom of someone's shoe. It's about being able to contribute to the success of a company. It's about being able to know that if your family times get tough and children and loved ones are sick, you can request time out to care. It's about young women being given the appropriate care and understanding when they become pregnant. It's not a shame to become pregnant, it's natural. At a time when it should be one of the happiest times of your life, not going through pregnancy, being denied access to proper care, being scared to take time out for antenatal classes and giving birth on the toilet floor. Come on, this is the 21st century. What we need from governments and employers is a fair deal at work. Work should provide people with security and fulfilment, not insecurity and dread. Just because people are present at work doesn't mean to say that they're giving their best when they're treated as second best. Decent employers and decent governments trust their employees, invest in their employees, treat them fairly, and the rewards in return are manyfold. Our government has begun formally the process of Britain leaving the EU. This has raised crucial issues of the rights of EU nationals who are presently living in Britain and who make a massive contribution to our society. So far, the government has refused their rights to guarantee their rights, saying it'll wait until it's a deal involving British nationals who live in the rest of Europe. Well, this kind of discrimination has to end. People are not bargaining chips, they're human beings with lives and friendships and families and community links. The government's attitude means terrible insecurity for EU nationals, including those who work at Sports Direct. We rely on EU nationals, for example, 92,000 work in the social care sector, which has massive staff shortages. 55,000 work in our NHS as nurses and doctors. 311,000 work in manufacturing. 210,000 work in construction. And 146,000 migrant workers support our kids in their education every day. All EU nationals who have come to live or work or study should retain the rights that they have now, guaranteed, full rights, indefinitely. Anything less means that at least some people will be forcibly removed from Britain. Families will be torn apart. We see that day in, day out. Valuable workers lost, and there'll be even more restrictions on those who are allowed to stay. Already, any EU national applying for proof of residency must now show that they've been living and working in Britain for the past 5 years, providing documents for every occasion they have left Britain in that period. Those who have not been working must reportedly show that they took out comprehensive health insurance, a requirement that was little known until recently. The government's refusal to grant workers' rights is already hitting our key services. Only 96 nurses joined the NHS from other European nations in December 2016. That was a drop of 1,304 in July of that year. This comes at a time when there are 24,000 nurse vacancies unfilled, and the government's withdrawal of bursaries for trained nurses is making that matter worse. We must take action now, show solidarity with EU nationals, and if you are an EU national, be part of fighting for your future, just like the workers at Sports Direct. We've already heard that low pay and rights at work are key election issues. Theresa May's Brexit plan is for low pay and minimum rights at work. Well, they make me cringe when they say they're the party for the workers. As Emily Thornberry said recently, it's bollocks. From the party who in 2015 launched the biggest crackdown on trade union rights for over 30 years, including plans to criminalise picketing, permit employers to hire strike-breaking agency staff, and choke off the flow of union funds to the Labour Party. These were acts designed to finish what Maggie Thatcher started, acts that were designed to stifle reasonable democratic scrutiny, protest and challenge, and to silence the critics of this government and its absolutely vindictive policies. I'm really pleased, in fact, I'm really proud and pleased that Rebecca and Toby are part of what I hope will be the next Labour government that will empower workers and trade unions, because we are stronger together as a movement when we stand together as a movement. I'm pleased that Labour will review the rules on recognition so that more workers have the security of a union, and I'm pleased and proud that whilst the Conservatives stand back and allow insecure work to spread like an ugly disease across our land, that Labour and our movement together will act to guarantee good jobs and businesses. Workers in Britain are amongst the easiest and cheapest to make redundant, meaning that multinational companies are taking decisions to downsize, that British workers are at a disadvantage. I'm pleased that a Labour government will consult with the trade unions and industry on reviewing redundancy arrangements to bring workers more in line with their counterparts. I've had a look at the next Labour government's 20-point action plan for security and equality at work. No decent employer should fear this plan. Every worker should get out and ensure they use their vote at the next election to make this plan the reality for many, including raising the minimum wage to the level of the living wage, which is expected to be the £10, which is why we're here tonight, by 2020, for all workers aged 18 and over, so that work actually does pay. Long gone should be the days where age was a barrier to receiving the same pay for the same work. It's no wonder that you young people have felt so disengaged with politics when they're treated like second-class citizens in the workplace, especially on the payroll. The 20-point plan by Labour and many other policies in the manifesto give hope to so many people that we know, so many communities that we live in. And that's why young people are actually joining Jeremy by the thousands, by the tens of thousands, and engaging in the fighting back for a future for the many, not just the few. So don't let this government and the right-wing media barons hold us back. We owe so much to our forebears who fought for the rights that we have today. Let's not any government take them away from us. Let's go forward together and build on and strengthen our rights. Let's make our forefathers and sisters and our children and their children proud of us. We mustn't let this government take us back towards slavery, for without our rights we are little more than slaves. Let's stand together, for together we're stronger, together we are the many, and together we can make this plan a reality. Let's get out there and do it. Solidarity.
Well, thanks a lot, Cheryl. Once again, a fantastic speech from a fantastic organiser who does so much for workers in our community. Now, I'm going to move on to our final panel speaker, Rebecca Long-Bailey, who I'm going to introduce, but I'm actually not quite going to introduce Rebecca, because I'm going to ask Toby to come and say a few words to introduce Rebecca from the front. So, Toby, Toby Perkins, our MP for Chesterfield, to introduce Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Okay, well, thank you very much, James, and thank you to both Cheryl and Gareth for those inspiring contributions. I think that it's a great pleasure to have Rebecca here in Chesterfield. She's been out with us today meeting voters in Brockwell. We've had very positive response on the doorsteps. But Gareth's absolutely right. You know, the government are not going to, the government and the media are not going to give us this election. We are going to have to fight for every single vote, and the pressure that has already come on to the Labour Party so far is only going to be redoubled by Murdoch's pack of wolves out there in the media. And it is only the work of people within the Labour Party and supporting the Labour Party campaign that's going to enable us to get a good result in this election. The evidence that we've heard from Cheryl and from Gareth has been absolutely compelling about some of the appalling employers that are out there. But I know, as someone who was in the shadow business team for the last 4 years, a role that Rebecca's obviously leading the team now, that actually there's a huge number of businesses in the business community that don't want to represent the kind of businesses that we've heard about today, but don't want to be disadvantaged in the workplace by those kind of unethical businesses that we've heard about. So don't let the Tories tell us that when we go out there and say we want all workers to be paid properly, when we say that we want all workers to be treated fairly, that it's going to make Britain uncompetitive. Because the vast majority of businesses out there recognise that a happy workforce, a workforce that isn't living in poverty, a workforce that's treated with respect and dignity, is a workforce that helps that business to be successful. And actually it's the role of a Labour government to ensure that we bring those unethical businesses in line with many of the businesses out there that recognise a successful workforce helps them to be a successful business. And I know that's very much a message that Rebecca will be giving and will be hearing when she's speaking to those businesses. So Rebecca, we welcome you to Chesterfield. We look forward, I think all encourage you to keep up the work in the face of this media onslaught that we are facing. I hope that we will get all of the people here that are happy to listen to that, supporting our campaign here in Chesterfield, right across North Derbyshire. We know that because of the Brexit vote and many other reasons, these seats the Tories are after in a way they've never been after before, and we are very much at the heart of the battle here in Chesterfield and North Derbyshire this time. We're very grateful to you for coming to join us. We're very much looking forward to hearing what you've got to say and how a future Labour government is going to address some of these issues we've heard about today and ensure that all the people here can work in a more civilised and prosperous working environment in the future. Rebecca.
Hi everybody, can you hear me all right? Sometimes I shout a bit, so if I start getting a bit ranty, just let me know. So I want to thank you for having me here today. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's a lovely place, Chesterfield, and driving across the hills from Manchester was absolutely delightful. So you're really lucky to live in such a beautiful part of the world. And I enjoyed my session out on the door knocker with Toby, who is a little bit of a local celebrity, it seems. Had cars driving past and beeping, and even some of the young kids were shouting, Toby! So that's a good sign. And it warms my heart when I see that, because MPs should be part of their community. They should be rooted in their community. And I think you've got a good one here. And you know how important it is to make sure that we get Toby re-elected and also to get a Labour government. So it won't surprise you to hear that a lot of what I'm going to say is going to be linked to the general election, because it's absolutely critical for us. But I wanted to start off by talking about where I'm from. So I'm from Salford. And we've got quite a proud trade union movement in Salford, like yourselves, and we've got a lot in common. You know, we were an ex-mining community, big industrial area in the north, and in the 80s we saw a lot of that destroyed. And even prior to that, we had key figures in the trade union movement fighting for a better world, if you like. And there's a place that we like to go to in Salford called Bexley Square, where in 1931 over 10,000 unemployed people marched to Bexley Square to protest about cuts to unemployment benefit, and it was cuts to the winter fuel allowance at the time, coal at the time, and they were met with police brutality, unfortunately. A lot of people were injured, and it became known as the Battle of Bexley Square. And now we've got one of those circular plaques in Bexley Square to commemorate that. And every May Day, we always march down to Bexley Square and we talk about how terrible everything is. And we remember the giants that stood before us. We have a saying in Salford that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Those people in our movement that have fought blood, sweat and tears to try and get the rights and freedoms that we have today and the rights that we should have today, but we don't have. So when I was in Bexley Square on May Day, I was having a bit of a moment thinking about where we were at. It was the actual day that I was launching my general election campaign as well, which was quite handy. And I thought, well, how far have we moved on since 1931? And we've made a few advances. We made significant progress in 1945. We made significant progress in 1997. But this government that we've had for the last 7 years has been like Margaret Thatcher on speed. It's taken us back to the dark ages. And now we're in a situation where we've got over 4 million children living in poverty. We've got people being forced to rely on food banks. We've got people in 0-hour contracts not knowing from one day to the next whether they're going to have a work to go to. And we've got people who are in full-time work having to rely on food banks. We've saw street homelessness rise every year significantly. I was just looking at one of Toby's local newspapers that showed me pictures of homeless people in Chesterfield. That's not acceptable. And at the same time, we've got a rate of house building that hasn't been as low since the 1920s. It's absolutely shocking. We've had horrific policies in the last few years. The benefit cap that push people to the edge of destitution, the bedroom tax. I see people in my office on a weekly basis who are living in, quite frankly, slum conditions with landlords that would rival Rackman, if anybody remembers Rackman from the 1970s. Mothers and children lying next to walls covered in black mould. And we're so used to it now, we think that this is acceptable. We forget that in the 1940s, it was the Labour Party who put forward a set of principles for decent and acceptable housing. And over the last 7 years, we just seem to have backpedalled and everybody accepts it as normal. Now, the thing that makes me really angry about all of this is that the people of Chesterfield and the people of Salford and the people of Britain as a whole, they've done everything that was asked of them. They've tried to work hard. They've tried to save to buy their own home if they wanted to. They've tried to pull up their bootstraps, as the Conservatives would say, and it's got them nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. Hopes and dreams have been absolutely crushed because people have fallen through the cracks of a system that should have been there to look after them when they needed it. It should have been there to pick up on their talents, and it should have been there to offer them a high-paid, high-skilled job, and it didn't. Now, another thing that really breaks my heart are benefit sanctions. And, I mean, this is one of the worst elements of this government that we've seen, I think. I had a guy that came into my office who he'd been benefit sanctioned because he wouldn't sign a new job seekers contract. They tried to force him to sign a new one. Now, we had the wherewithal to realise that they couldn't do that. They couldn't force him under duress to sign a new job seekers contract. He was entitled to remain with the one that he had. So in the job centre, he refused to sign it, and he knew the legal definition to write. It was VC that he wrote on the bottom of his form, which was a Latin term to show that he'd signed it under duress. Now, the job centre didn't get what he was doing, and they said, look, that's not acceptable. I'm afraid we're going to have to sanction you. So he was a bit shocked, went away, ended up being sanctioned for nearly 3 months. Now, the man, he was a proud man. He'd worked all of his life up until the point that he'd been out of work. He'd always had a full-time job. and he'd struggled to get a full-time job because he had diabetes. Now, when he was sanctioned, he didn't want to go to his friends to tell them that he'd been sanctioned because he was ashamed. He didn't have any money to live on. He couldn't pay for his electricity, which meant that he couldn't pay to have his fridge on. Couldn't keep his medication in the fridge. Couldn't buy the right food to self-regulate him. And eventually, he had to have his leg amputated. And the horrible thing is that when he came to my office and we got him help and we appealed against the decisions, within a matter of about 3 or 4 weeks, they came back, withdrew the sanction and gave him all of the money back that he should have been entitled to and apologised. But it wasn't enough to save his leg. And he was a man who had the wherewithal to come to see his MP. So I wonder how many people there are out there that this is happening to, that simply accept it as normal and just get on with things. I think they're in the hundreds of thousands, if not more. Now, I'm getting to a point here. Now, the government told us that the reason that they wanted to implement the savage cuts that we've seen to public services, the horrific policies like benefit sanctions and bedroom tax, they told us that we needed to do this because we all had to pull together, because we'd been through a difficult financial time and that we all had to, tighten our belts and then we'd have a bit of a rocky road, but we'd all get through it together and then we'd reach utopia at the end. Well, obviously, that didn't happen. And we know that the austerity that they've imposed on us over the last 7 years hasn't made our economy better. It hasn't improved productivity. In fact, people's living standards are worse now than they were before the financial crash in 2008. Education is worse. We know the cuts to schools are going to have a significant impact on our future ability to be a world economic leader, because we won't have the skills necessary to compete on the world stage. We know that they're not investing in our regions. They're not replacing the industries that we lost in the 1980s. They're not investing in infrastructure to make sure that we actually have the tools that attract businesses to us, to make sure that we're productive, that they want to, take that risk themselves and invest in a factory, invest in a shop, invest in a business. They won't do that because we're not providing the basics, the very basics that they need to flourish. But in the midst of all this, instead of the government holding up their hands and saying, oh, we're sorry, we just, it was a bad plan, long-term economic plan, what were we thinking? They didn't say that. They tried to divide us. They tried to encourage us to point the finger of blame at different groups. They tried to encourage us to blame benefit scroungers, because obviously all of the wealth was being sucked out of our system by people that were claiming incapacity benefit. They tried to encourage us to blame immigrants, often in areas where there wasn't an issue with immigration. And the list goes on. They said, don't be angry at the privatisers profiting from our public services. Be angry instead at the migrant worker at the end of the street. Don't be angry at the government for running down our schools and hospitals. Be angry instead at the disabled woman or the unemployed man. But we know now, I think the British people realise that it wasn't them that crashed the economy. It was greed that crashed the economy. And this greed continues. And unfortunately, it's accelerated over the last 7 years, because we've seen this government make decisions to help a tiny, tiny percentage of people at the top, whilst everybody else suffers. They've cut our public services at the same time as slashing taxes for the extremely wealthy. Now, they also allow multinational corporations, not unlike the ones we've heard about today, to hide their money in the Cayman Islands, shall we say, and avoid paying their taxes in this country. They allow people like Philip Green to completely asset strip great British businesses, asset strip them, ones that potentially could have been productive had they had the right investment, and leave thousands of people without decent pensions. They slashed taxes, as I say, and now the cherry on the cake, they're telling us now that if they don't get a Brexit deal, in order to make us competitive, they're going to turn us into a tax haven. Well, we know what way that's going to send the country, don't we? We know that that means deregulation, and we know that it certainly doesn't mean prosperity for the many. I think if you watch documentaries about tax havens across the world, like the Cayman Islands, for example, there was a good Panorama documentary about it that showed that these tax havens, they're simply parking places for people's wealth, and they actually don't, invest in the communities that those companies park their wealth in. So the vast majority of people living on the Cayman Islands, apart from, one tiny proportion of the island, the actual indigenous population are living in abject poverty. Now, the point I'm trying to make, and I think you already know this, because we've had some fantastic contributions from our speakers here. This is the rigged economy, and it's been rigged deliberately for some time. Well, the point is that Britain is the 6th richest economy in the world. And you know what? It's about time the people who created that wealth, the British people, the people of Chesterfield, the people where I'm from in Salford, it's about time that they shared in that wealth and entered into a society where if you work hard, you will get rewarded, no matter what your occupation is, no matter what your background is. And people will be fairly taxed in a proportionate amount relative to what they earn or what income they generate as a company. So the general election is a clear choice then. It's a choice between a Labour Party that will stand up for the many and look after the interests of the many, or it's a Conservative Party who will continue to protect that privileged few. Now, it's the rigged economy the Tories are protecting, and it's this rigged economy that the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn are challenging. Now, Jeremy said when he first started the election campaign that much of the media establishment have said that this general election is a foregone conclusion. And he said that they think that there are rules in politics that if you don't doff your cap to powerful people, then you won't get on. And if you don't play the game, then you're not going to get anywhere. And that quite simply, if you don't accept that things really have to be like this, you might be able to make slight improvements, but don't go too mad because it really has to stay like this, otherwise we're not going to let you in, then we'll never win. But they don't want the Labour Party to win. And they don't want Jeremy Corbyn to win. Because when he wins, and when the Labour Party wins, it's the people who win, not the powerful. Yeah. And Jeremy also said we don't fit in their cosy club. We're not obsessed with the tittle-tattle of Westminster politics, and we don't accept that Britain should be governed by an elite who don't pay their taxes in this country. And we don't accept that the British people just have to accept that this is how it has to be and accept what they're given. And you know what? When we're elected on June the 8th, we won't accept that this is the way it has to be. And we've stated that in our manifesto. It's one of the most bold, transformative manifestos I think this country has ever seen. It will transform our society. It will give people hope for the future. It will say to children that you can be whatever you want to be when you grow up because we'll make sure that your education system is there. It will say to older people, you deserve care. You deserve a decent triple lock pension. You deserve a winter fuel allowance because you worked hard to put into this country and to make it the Great Britain that it is. So we will reward you and respect you for that. We will look after you collectively as a society. We'll take on the cosy cartels that are hoarding this country's wealth for themselves with quite an extensive tax avoidance programme. And we'll use that wealth to invest in people's lives in every community. We'll invest in businesses and industry in all of our regions, not just down south, to make sure that we have prosperity that reaches every single corner of every single community. And we'll make sure that we develop a landscape that makes sure that everybody is entitled to a high-skilled, high-paid job. Now, we'll make sure that our public services get the funding that they need to look after us, and we'll give workers better pay and security at work. Now, I'm really delighted that you've got today's event, and I think it's fantastic that it's fallen when it has, because only a few weeks ago we launched in the Labour Party our manifesto on workers' rights, where we said that we'll ban 0 hours contracts. We'll make sure that everybody gets a minimum of a £10 living wage. And I make the point on this, is that that's not an aspirational amount, that's a benchmark, a starting point. And we'll make sure that businesses, small and medium-sized businesses that might struggle, will have the ability to pay that. We will help them, and this is messages that aren't getting out into the press, which upsets me. So we're setting up a living wage review board to assess the assistance that certain businesses might need, because we don't want anybody to fall through the net on this. We'll make sure that trade unions have access to every single workplace so that we can collectively organise, because we are stronger together, and we want to make sure that we have the ability to collectively bargain in terms of our rights and in terms of our salaries. We'll also make sure that incidents such as Philip Green never happen again, so we'll have a stricter takeover regime that protect great British companies and protect our assets and make sure that those workers and those stakeholders' interests are protected properly. We'll also focus on giving people real control over their lives. And I won't go through every single manifesto commitment that we've got, because I'll be here all night. I'll just talk about a few of the exciting ones. And one of the exciting ones for me this week, because I've been quite heavily involved in it, is about energy and water. And what we're talking about doing is, firstly, in terms of gas and electricity. Now, we know that the energy sector has gone out of control. The Competition and Markets Authority have stated only last year that people are paying £2 billion in excess of what they should be paying in terms of their bills. So we've said that we're going to implement an energy price cap, and we said that in the last manifesto. We haven't changed our position. The Tories have pinched our idea, by the way, but they haven't actually stated that they're going to fully implement it to the extent that we wanted to do it. But what we've said is a price cap is a temporary measure. It won't fix the energy market. The only way that we'll fix the energy market is making sure that we have greater control. So firstly, we're going to make sure that there is a regional energy company in every single region of the country that will supply energy, not for profit, and they will also be given the ability to invest in renewables. They'll have a minimum amount of renewables that they have to deliver locally to encourage the use of renewable electricity, but they'll also be given the ability to invest, as I say, in the generating capacity over the long term. The second thing we want to do over time is to take control of the distribution networks, which are your substations and your pylons, and also the national grid, because a lot of people don't realise how complex the electricity and gas system is that we've got, national grid and the distribution network operators are private companies that hold these assets in perpetuity, essentially. It's not like a normal government contract where you would have it for 5 years and then if you didn't like them, you'd be able to get rid of them and get somebody else in. They have these contracts forever. And all of those profits that they're making when they're charging tariffs, which are in your electricity and gas bills, by the way, all of those profits are being paid out to shareholders, when it could have been better used investing in the infrastructure and upgrading it and making sure that we had an energy system fit for the 21st century. Then on water, it's a similar thing. What we're going to do is take over the water companies across the UK. We've got a terrible state of affairs, unfortunately, in the water sector. They paid over £18 billion in dividends to shareholders since the water industry was privatised. We have a selection of water companies that aren't even registered in the UK for tax. They're actually registered in the Cayman Islands. And 3 of the water companies last year actually paid out more in dividends to shareholders than they actually made in profits. Now, that's not financially sustainable. No, sane-minded businessman or woman would run a business on that basis. So we can see that there is trouble ahead for the water industry, and we want to make sure that, given that it's one of our key assets and we can't live without it, businesses can't live without it, households can't live without it, we want to make sure that we have the infrastructure that we deserve when it comes to water. It's safe, it's of good quality, and we have it for the cheapest price possible. So that's why we're bringing the water sector back into public ownership as well. And then one final point, because it might come up when you're having your discussions on the doorstep, because the Tories have tried to get a lot of mileage out of this. They tried to kind of create the assumption that, oh, well, you're going to go mad borrowing money, aren't you? You know, Labour again, borrowing money. That's not the case when it comes to the energy sector, the gas sector and the water sector. These are profitable companies that we will take over, and we've spoken this week about examining a range of options when it comes to compensation for those companies, and one of them is swapping shares for corporate bonds. So we would do that in the first instance, and then over a small period of time that corporate bond would essentially be paid off. And because it's a revenue generating industry, we would see profits in the long term. So it's a savvy investment for us to make, especially when interest rates are so low. And, you know, Philip Hammond himself has actually advocated borrowing at such low interest rates, although he's pretended that he doesn't now. But we've got it on record only last year that he made that remark when he was doing his autumn statement, that it was prudent to borrow at such low interest rates to invest in vital infrastructure. So that's just a few of the exciting things that we're doing. But ultimately, this is about rebuilding our economy. It's a new deal for the British economy, if you like. And it's about making sure that we give businesses the tools that they need to thrive and to prosper. But when they do, that prosperity isn't sucked up to the top, like, you know, Margaret Thatcher wanted us to believe, and we all thought it would eventually trickle down. We know that doesn't work. So we want to make sure that prosperity reaches out to everybody. Because ultimately, one of the primary goals and objectives of a government is to ensure that their people, that the British citizens, have a good quality of life. So, just to finish, because I've been talking for quite a long time now, and I'm sure you'll probably need to get home to have your tea. I was thinking about Greggs before as well. It's making me think about Greggs, like, oh, I could quite go for a Greggs now. But I think you know what we're trying to say. On June the 8th, we want to elect a Labour government because we're going to build a country for the many, not the few. And I know that you're all here today because, like me, like Toby, like our panel tonight, you believe that another world is possible. And like the people that fought before you, those great men and women of Chesterfield, the great men and women of my city, those giants on shoulders who we stand, they believed another world was possible. And I don't want their fights to be in vain. I don't want us to have to go through this cycle every 20 or 30 years to try and recoup the things that we lose under a Tory government. We've got to make sure that we get a Labour government on June the 8th. We've got to make sure that the fight and the blood, sweat and tears of our movement had a purpose, that it meant something. And I want you to go back after June the 8th and look back at yourself in the mirror and say, yeah, do you know what? I'm a socialist. And when the time came to stand up and be counted, I did. And I gave it my all. And like we heard tonight, I fought like a lion to make sure that Labour won. And when Labour did win, I fought like a lion to make sure that they didn't get pushed out of government ever again. So go out there, get it away. Get out there to wherever you live. Get out there to the areas where you think your MPs, your Labour MPs are struggling, and help them. Get out there and help Toby. Make sure he gets a bigger majority so that we can say, do you know what, Theresa May? Chesterfield says no. Yeah.